It's Monday, August 19th. I'm Scott Pianowski, and welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast. It is a lovely, delightful day to talk ball. Joining me to do just that is my friend Kate Magdziuk, whose last name we have confirmed rhymes with Ayuk, even though Brandon Ayuk is not going to her beloved Steelers, it looks like. Kate, how you doing today?
I'm doing awesome. Outside of Brandon Ayuk, that's kind of the biggest hang up here, but we're in the thick of preseason. We've got real football. We've got real live mock drafts, which I guess are mocks, so they're not real. But the whole point is that we have actual tangible things to talk about. And we're kind of out of that theoretical window of the fantasy offseason, and things are getting spicy.
Yeah, where are you in your draft cadence? How many drafts? I guess maybe the power bar. Are you 20% done, 30% done, 50% done? How deep are you into the teeth of this season?
Well, I've got like 7 dynasty leagues, so like all of those are in the rear view mirror. We did our rookie drafts, somewhere between May and June. And so now I've really just got the rest of my redraft league. So if we're looking at redraft drafts, I've got Scott Fishbowl, and then I've got about 7 other ones that I still have to carry on. So mock drafts from Yahoo Fantasy have been very helpful for me and analyzing the field. And we've got another mock draft today, a Superflex, which is even better because I've got a couple of Superflex drafts coming up here in the coming week. Perfect time to prepare.
Great time for it. Of course, Kate isn't just a podcaster with us and an editor with us. She's also a writer. Check out her Fade column that went up last week. She did the bust column last year and did a great job with it. She is unafraid to tell you what great players you should not draft for various reasons. So I hope you check that out. And as Kate said, we are doing Mock Draft Monday. It's Superflex. It's one of my favorite formats. Every league that I create is usually a Superflex league. Then what is a Superflex league? It's basically, you want an example, an opportunity to play. As my dog is whining a little bit. Do you like Superflex, Jimmy? It's basically a 2 quarterback league, is Superflex. It's one of the flex positions can be a quarterback, a running back, a wide receiver, or a tight end. But because quarterbacks score the most points, you're going to want to play that second quarterback when you can. Now, if you hit injuries, if you hit a bad bye week, you're not totally screwed. You can play a running back, a receiver, or a tight end there. So you have options. But what usually happens in Superflex is you're going to want to have 2 starting quarterbacks every week. You probably want to have a third quarterback on your bench. Where are you, Kate, with Superflex? Is a format you like? I know the Fishbowl is a Superflex league, so we usually try to get 3 good quarterbacks there. Is it pro for you? Is it con for you? Is it kind of in the middle? How do you feel about the format?
It's absolutely pro. And the reason that it's pro is because the quarterback position is so deep right now. And even last year, where we saw more injuries to starting quarterbacks, I'm pretty sure we broke the record in terms of the number of quarterbacks that started a game in a single season just here in the 2023 year. And because of that, because of the rotations, because of the injuries, because of the skill that we have right now in the National Football League, there are a ton of options. So it feels kind of like a waste if you only have a single quarterback league because there's a lot of talent. There's a lot of fantasy points being left out on the waiver wire. I don't like to waste. I don't consider myself a wasteful person. So I'm not going to waste those points on the waiver wire. I want them to be accounted for in these leagues. And it adds a level of strategy to the quarterback position that has been kind of lost for the last couple of years.
Well, we're not here to be wasteful. And, it's funny, Kate. I know a player that you and I are both in on this year is Trevor Lawrence, who, despite being, I think it was quarterback 7 and quarterback 12 the last 2 seasons, he's quarterback 16 right now in Yahoo. So he's being drafted as a backup. In Superflex, I think you draft Trevor Lawrence as a target. He's an ideal quarterback 2. I think you could get into the quarterback 1 conversation. And so if there's people out there who haven't tried the Superflex format, and look, the people who listen to this podcast, I think a lot of you are playing multiple leagues. Maybe some are more hardcore than others. Maybe some are for no money. Some are for maybe bigger money. There could be an office league. There could be a family league, playing with your kids, whatever it is. There's no wrong way to play fantasy. But if you're looking for that extra league, the 2 things I would push for, if you haven't tried salary cap, play salary cap. I put an article last week about some salary cap tips where you have diversity of roster build. And that's what I love about Superflex, right? Is no more of this the first round. It's going to be, running backs, receivers, running backs, receivers, running backs, receivers. And even though Josh Allen is great, and Jalen Hurts is great, and Lamar Jackson is great, and Anthony Richardson is ridiculously, just hyped up right now. In a Superflex league, Lawrence Jackson, our friend over at NBC Roto World, he took Anthony Richardson first overall in the Superflex league. We know Dalton Del Don has ranked Anthony Richardson first overall on his quarterback board. Now, I can't quite get off on that, but this is just the different. Here's the thing, right? Fishbowl, you mentioned. Kate, I love drafts where the first round is every league is a snowflake. I don't want the first round to be, it's the same 12 guys in kind of the same order. I want differences of opinion. I want different shades, different shapes, and that's what you get in this format.
Yeah, I absolutely love the different ways you can construct your roster, because we saw it in our mock draft, which you guys can check out the write up on the site here. But 5 of the top 7 picks in the draft were running backs, quarterbacks. But it doesn't necessarily mean you have to take a quarterback. We had some folks that kind of prioritized a couple of skill position players, and then sat back, played the field a little bit, went for some value picks, in the 3rd and 4th rounds. We had some people that hammered quarterback, got 2 kind of elite starting quarterbacks in the 1st and 2nd round, and maybe sacrificed some of that top tier production at running back or wide receiver. There's a lot of different ways that you can approach your build that you definitely get a much more unique draft board every single Superflex draft, because I will say, I don't necessarily think there's like a wrong way to approach your Superflex draft in the early rounds. And because the draft boards are so unpredictable, that also means you have to be a very agile fantasy manager and come into your drafts with an open mind. You can't plan for a Superflex draft the same way that I think you can kind of prep and know the field of, a more standard, half PPR format.
And again, that to me is 100% feature. It's not a bug. I love diversity. I love different build shapes. We're going to talk about some of the takeaways from this mock draft that we did this past week in a second. Time for a break. And also later on this show, we're going to be taking your questions. This is Prime Help You. Let us help you. Help us help you. You can submit questions. We'll talk about that a little bit later. We'll answer some viewer mail and let you know how you can be in on the next wave of advice from your favorite Yahoo pundits. But again, takeaways coming in a second. Stay with us. Yahoo Fantasy Forecast. Okay, we're back. Scott Pianowski sitting in for Matt Harmon today, and Kate Magdziuk is our guest, writer and editor for Yahoo Sports, and one of my favorite people in the fantasy space. So we did a draft last week. Superflex, only 1 flex, only 2 running backs, 2 receivers. So one thing that I thought was a big takeaway here is that in a lot of standard drafts, I'm pounding this whole idea: hero running back, get 1 running back you like, get a bunch of receivers, beat everybody in the receiver room. And a lot of people just did not prioritize receiver here because you only had to start 2, and that only flex is going to probably be a quarterback. I look at your build, for example, from the 3 spot: Christian McCaffrey, perfectly reasonable. And then Dak Prescott and Jared Goff, you got your quarterback room set up. So you didn't take a receiver until Mike Evans in the 4th round. Your second receiver was Devontae Adams in the 6th round. You're not going to get those receiver values in a different setup, but Superflex prioritizing quarterback, only 2 receivers starting. Your flex is probably going to be a second quarterback. So I think most people in this draft realized that you had to devalue a receiver, which may not apply to a standard league, but it applied in what we did last week.
Yeah, definitely applied. And that was kind of my idea here going in. Even in the 5th round, I was the first person to jump the gun on a tight end, took Sam Laporta in the 5th round. So by that point, I had my 2 quarterbacks. I had my first running back, my first wide receiver. At that point, when I'm looking at the field here, knowing we can deprioritize the wide receivers a little bit, knowing that the running back is a volatile position and I've already got my hero RB, I saw Sam Laporta on the board in the 5th and I said, okay, I got the stack with Jared Goff. I've got a nice schedule indoors for most of the season with my Lions. And I've got my tight end 1 on the year. It gave me the luxury to go in on that early tight end, even though that's not necessarily a strategy that I roll with in all of my leagues.
There's some interesting stacks here too. I mean, you mentioned Goff and Laporta. I think in Superflex, it's imperative to have 3 starting quarterbacks. And you later took Russell Wilson in the 11th round. He pairs nicely with George Pickens, who you got in the 8th round. So you don't have CeeDee Lamb, but you have Dak Prescott throwing to elite receiver and Lamb, assuming they eventually make nice and Lamb's in decent shape. Producer Colin can probably give some intel on that. You got the Goff Laporta stack, which was Laporta was such a blast last year. I had no Laporta, but I rooted for him every week. I even hit his prop a couple of times or played him in DFS because he's just a blast to watch. And then you follow the Steelers really closely. You can probably speak to Russell Wilson and George Pickens maybe better than anybody. And then maybe talk about that, just the importance of a third quarterback, the importance maybe of some stacks, and maybe, throw in a state of the Pittsburgh Steeler offense if you like.
Okay. The third quarterback, I do think, is absolutely imperative in this format because you've got to account for bye weeks. Obviously, there's a lot, there's a lot less waiver wire availability here when it comes to the quarterback position. You have, a 10-team league and all of you take 3 quarterbacks. That leaves 2 starting quarterbacks on the waiver wire, hypothetically. And that's not even accounting for some of the eager draftees who maybe grab 4 or 5 because they love to have that kind of, power. They like to have that edge where they know that they're going to be the team that you're calling up when you have an injury to your starters. There's just not a ton of availability here on the waiver wire in Superflex, which again makes it more competitive, makes it a little bit more interesting. But I want that third insurance policy. Now, I'm going to segue that into my little nuggets on the Steelers here, because I do think Russell Wilson, probably one of the better values, especially in a super flex league. Last year, Russell Wilson, not necessarily a guy you were excited to roster most of the year. He was kind of on that fringe QB1, QB2, like mid-range QB2. He's not like a high upside version of Russell Wilson right now. But what I love is the system that he's going into with Arthur Smith. I know we're very angry and bitter about Arthur Smith, the head coach, but Arthur Smith, the OC, was pretty good for generating efficiency in the passing attack. And in terms of Russell Wilson's skill set, what he can do under play action while healthy, which has also been kind of a component that I think affected Russell Wilson here over the past couple of years. Setting up the deep ball, for instance, Russell Wilson, still a very good deep passing quarterback. And that complements the skill set of, George Pickens perfectly. Even Van Jefferson, been getting some interestingly good reviews here in training camp as a wide receiver too. Pittsburgh has a pretty strong run game. I think that's going to complement Russell Wilson under center in the play action attack. And I just think George Pickens, for what we saw in a really bad offense last year with Kenny Pickett, Mitch Trubisky, Mason Rudolph, let's not forget, George Pickens is coming off an 1,100-yard season. The only reason he wasn't more fruitful for fantasy was because of a lack of touchdowns. But I think we all have to agree that with Russell Wilson under center or Justin Fields, if that is your preference, both of these quarterbacks offer a lot more upside in terms of passing touchdown production. Russell Wilson alone had more passing touchdowns in 2023 than the Steelers had over the last 2 seasons combined. George Pickens is such a smash. And I even think, let's say Brandon Ayuk goes to Pittsburgh, which I have my prayer circles activated. I still think the way that this offense is going to be constructed sets up this team for a lot of efficiency across the board, even if there's not a very high play volume, not a high passing volume. I don't know. I think Russell Wilson's a great value, and I do think he has a much more significant edge over Justin Fields in terms of his position in this offense than anybody would probably guess based on the narratives of the quote-unquote quarterback controversy in Pittsburgh.
And for whatever people may have against Russell Wilson or Justin Fields, they are players with flaws. We understand that. Russell Wilson supported a breakout season from Courtland Sutton, who, but by the way, one of my favorite picks. I got him at pick 131 in this draft against Superflex. It's only 2 receivers. You're not going to get Sutton that late in your draft, but I still think he's a good target. And Justin Fields supported a really good season from DJ Moore. So it's not like these guys weren't, I get the idea. All of Pittsburgh was ready to drive Kenny Pickett to the airport. Nobody's going to miss Mason Rudolph. So again, a flawed Wilson, a flawed Fields. It still feels like an upgrade. And we see it a lot too with Arthur Smith. And I'm glad you mentioned Smith. I mean, he drove us crazy in Atlanta. I get it.
Yes.
But sometimes, a coach can be spread thin when he's the head coach and he's the offensive coordinator, he's the play caller. And it's not unusual. Wade Phillips probably wasn't a great head coach. He was a great coordinator. You see that sometimes with guys who are better. Maybe Cliff Kingsbury would be a better coordinator in Washington than he was a head coach in Arizona. Sometimes, Josh McDaniels was a really good coordinator for a long time in New England. I know he had some good pieces. He had Tom Brady and all that stuff, but I always felt confident with him as a Patriots fan. And, Josh McDaniels will never be a head coach again, I don't think, because I don't think he has the personality for it. He understands like the tenor of a locker room. But so maybe it's a case of Arthur Smith coordinator. And you did some good things in Tennessee, as you mentioned, had a nice run with Tannehill. I think that could make a lot of sense. Because this is the Superflex format, I just want to really bounce really quickly and tell you how every team approached quarterback. So first team, Dan Titus, he took Brock Purdy in the second round, Matthew Stafford round 6, Aaron Rodgers round 7. So there's a nice 3 quarterback setup. Andy Behrens, all excited about Josh Allen and Caleb Williams with picks 1 and 3. And they took Geno Smith as a third quarterback. Dak Prescott, Jared Goff, and Russell Wilson, as we talked about, went to Kate's team in round 3. Even though Matt's all about the wide receivers, he's all about the quarterbacks in this draft, Hurts and Love in the first 2 rounds. I'm a big Jalen Hurts guy this year. Matt LaFleur, I just don't think gets enough credit as being an elite play caller, play designer, and that's why that touchdown rate was so high last year. It will regress a little bit. I think it will still be above league average. He still took a backup quarterback, Matt did, with Derek Carr in round 13. Producer Colin said, no, I'm going to spit in the wind. I'm going to take Lamar Jackson, then wait for my second quarterback, Baker Mayfield, in round 8 without Dave Canales. Makes me a little bit nervous. And then he took Justin Fields just to spite Kate and make for a spicy argument on this podcast if we let Colin's mic hot. But Lamar Jackson is a good start in any league. Certainly a super flex. Jason Kabaka, our fearless editor, Patrick Mahomes went in the first round, Joe Burrow in the second round, and I don't think he took a third quarterback, which I understand when you start that hot, but maybe he'll be in on waivers if we played this league out for a third one. Mo Castillo, one of our editors, Anthony Richardson, Jaden Daniels is a fun, young, exciting pair to start off with. And he took Will Levis as the third quarterback. We talk about that being important. Dalton Del Don waited into the 4th round, still got Tua, got Kirk Cousins, Justin Herbert. So 4, 6, and 8 were the rounds on those 3 guys. Here's a case too, where if you're going to wait at the position, you might want to be more proactive with the third quarterback, and Dalton was. I think he'll have a lesser room for quarterbacks based on what the guys we have. Tua doesn't run at all. I mean, he leads the league in passing yards last year. He was quarterback 9, quarterback 10, depending on format, but he did get good depth at the position. Tara Roberts was the 9th team. She took Kyler Murray, 2nd round, Deshaun Watson, 5th round. She ends up with Bo Nix in the 10th round. And the funny thing about that is that she wanted Daniel Jones. I was on the end. I took CJ Stroud, 1st round, Trevor Lawrence, we talked about in the 3rd round. I took Daniel Jones right before Tara, and she said, "I can't believe I'm frustrated that I was sniped on Daniel Jones." To which I said to Tara, "The only thing worse than not getting Daniel Jones is getting Daniel Jones." Let's talk about Daniel Jones for a second. Not going to be drafted in standard leagues, right? I mean, he's been a flop the last couple of years, but they did get Neighbors. He does run some in the deeper formats, in the Superflex formats. Sometimes you have to roll with some unusual players. Bo Nix, I thought was an interesting pick for Tara. I think he will be the starter for Denver. He's obviously the quarterback Sean Payton wanted. Are you in? We're thinking about quarterbacks outside the top 20 rounds, top 20 picks. I mean, Deshaun Watson would be one of those guys. Derek Carr is a player who's hard to trust at times. I mentioned Jones, mentioned Bo Nix. Any of those guys, who are some of the targets you like super flex for quarterbacks outside the top 20?
Let me just be clear. I'm not making an argument here that Daniel Jones is a good NFL quarterback, but I think he's probably one of the most interesting kind of like QB3s that you can get in super flex leagues. Let's not forget 2022, he finished as the quarterback 9. He was a top 10 quarterback in 2022. And a big part of that was some of the rushing upside. Now, the biggest question about that rushing upside is definitely the fact that he's coming off this torn ACL. Played 6 games last year, and so TBD on whether or not we actually see that rushing upside. But in 2022, again, he was one of the best rushing quarterbacks in the National Football League, 708 rushing yards, 7 touchdowns. He had some juice in that aspect. And I also want to point out the fact that Malik Neighbors, hands down, is the best wide receiver that Daniel Jones has ever thrown a football to. Like, it's not even particularly close for me. So do I think Daniel Jones has been a good quarterback to this point? No. Do I think he's had the personnel to succeed? Also, no. So, like, if we're going to give Sam Darnold some flowers as a potential renaissance man with, like a new coaching system, some really good receivers, I think maybe we also give Daniel Jones a little bit of credit and maybe give him a little bit of grace in terms of, like, maybe we haven't seen the best of Daniel Jones, in general, and maybe there's something untapped there with Malik Neighbors in the book. And I also want to point out Theo Johnson, one of my favorite tight end sleepers to take in like the last round of fantasy drafts. Rookie tight end, uber athletic, ranked top 10 in terms of relative athletic score. He's been catching some balls in training camp, and it sounds like he could be like tight end 1, but again, a big bodied, uber athletic dude that, like, again, probably one of the better receiving tight ends that Jones has ever played with, because Darren Waller was supposed to be that guy. That flamed out. Like, there are a lot of reasons that you can kind of talk yourself into Daniel Jones being a viable QB3.
Totally see that. I mean, I like Brian Dable. And you talked about this is Neighbors, easily the best receiver that Jones has ever played with. I believe the stat is there's never been an 800-yard receiver on the Giants in the Daniel Jones era. A little bit of that is on Jones, but mostly it's because their rosters always get wide receiver 3s and 4s on it, asked to be wide receiver 1s and 2s, just guys asked to do more than maybe they're capable of. They are going to target Neighbors off the bunch. He's going to get like 160, 165 targets. The joke they had back in the day, we're going to run CJ Spiller till he throws up. And we found out that was after 3 carries. They're going to target Neighbors until he throws up. And again, the Konami code, the Rich Rebar Konami code applies here because Jones can run for anywhere from 500 to 700 yards. So again, this is the types of choices you make when you're playing Superflex. And I think it's a feature. Some people might think it's a bug. I think every quarterback, every running back of any value gets drafted. Any receiver who's going to be a top 3 receiver on his team gets drafted. We're drafting 18, 20, 22 tight ends in a lot of fantasy leagues. Why shouldn't we draft all the starting quarterbacks? Before we head to the next segment, I just want to mention you drafted Jackson Smith and Jigba in the 13th round, probably go earlier in a standard format. This is Superflex. Seattle, new coat of paint, new coordinator. Geno Smith, poor season last year, but the offensive line went kablooey in week 1. Wasn't that long ago? Some people were talking about, I think Brian Hartline at one point said, yeah, we've had a lot of good receivers. I think JSN might be the best of the group. Nobody's saying that now, right? We're all in love with Garrett Wilson. We're all in love with Chris Olave. Marvin Harrison Jr. comes into the league with all sorts of high expectations. He'll go in the second round of some drafts, early pick. So JSN's kind of the forgotten guy here. He was hurt most of his rookie year, but now Grubb's here, the Washington OC, who's an exciting piece. Where are you at with JSN in year 2? And maybe just give us an overview of how you're drafting Seattle this year.
I'm actually kind of shocked to see JSN fall to the wayside here, because I just like to remind everybody there was a time, let's say the 2021 season, when you had a pretty darn good receiving core at Ohio State. You had Jackson Smith and Jigba, you had Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, as you mentioned. And guess who was the best player on that field? Guess who was the focal point of that offense? It wasn't Garrett Wilson. It wasn't Chris Olave, though they were integral parts of that passing attack. It was JSN who was the guy. And this man just turned 22 years old in February. I want to give you some stats over his final 2 seasons at OSU, which his final season cut short due to injury. But in his final 2 seasons per PFF, 99th percentile PFF receiving grade, 99th percentile separation percentage, 99th percentile yards per route run, 92nd percentile in yards after the catch per reception. All of those via PFF, he was elite. He was elite, period, stop, end. There was absolutely no competing with him. So, coming in year one, posted just over 600 receiving yards in what wasn't a fantastic option. He was the wide receiver 3 on his respective offense. Though, like, again, I think there's a lot of room for him to take over as that wide receiver 2 role. He can play in the slot. That's primarily where he's played, but I do think he's kind of underrated. I think he's probably got more to offer along the outside than most people would guess based on how he's played primarily in the slot. And we got to talk about Tyler Lockett potentially creating some new opportunities just because of the fact that he's getting older. We've seen a decline in efficiency year over year. We've seen a drop in yards per reception, yards after the catch per reception, yards per route run in each of the last 2 seasons. Like, there is 100% room in what I consider to be an ascending offense under Ryan Grubb. And JSN, he was my wide receiver 1 just last season in that draft class. Just because he didn't have the immediate year 1 breakout doesn't mean I'm not all in on him in year 2. He also wasn't healthy. Had I think a broken wrist, ended up getting a hamstring injury. It just never came together. But he 100% has the skill set to be, I think, the maybe more of a volume guy for the Seattle Seahawks. Like, I would not be surprised in year 2, year 3, if he took over as leader in targets, leader in receptions, maybe not leader in crazy splash plays a la DK Metcalf, but like, I love JSN.
A lot of good stuff to unpack there. As you mentioned, Lockett, he's into his age 32 season. And we always talk about player development is not always linear. It's nice when their career is like a plane taking off where they get a little bit better and a little bit better and a little bit better.
And we've been spoiled in recent seasons with some pretty linear progressions.
Right. And guys like Chase and Jefferson just announcing, they joined the league and here I am, I'm ready to be a star right out of the box. But what JSN went into where they already had 2 established receivers. And again, their entire offensive line got hurt in week 1. And, maybe there's a coaching staff that needed to be overhauled. That's been done. With understanding that, Metcalf, he can be a frustrating player at times, but he's still talented. Lockett will do something. JSN, I just can't believe every scout was wrong on him, just like I can't believe every scout was wrong on Kyle Pitts. He's getting a new coordinator and a new quarterback at an interesting time. I'm in on Kyle Pitts this year. Today's a Superflex conversation. Does this make Geno Smith a good target as maybe a quarterback 3 in Superflex? Or even could Geno Smith be in the quarterback 2 conversation in a standard league? Let's say you had one of the vanity quarterbacks, so your backup quarterback isn't as much of a priority. Could you feel comfortable with somebody like Geno Smith?
Absolutely. And Geno Smith, in regards to like what he did last year, like you mentioned, offensive line, not great. We saw some just overall decrease in efficiency, but Geno Smith still going to be throwing to the trio of what I believe is probably a top 5 wide receiver trio in the National Football League between DK Metcalf, JSN, and even an aging Tyler Lockett. Improvements on the offensive line. We hope that they stay healthy. And then there's also the fact that Geno Smith kind of has some low-key rushing upside. Like, I think he's a great dart throw. And again, what I consider to be a really exciting ascending offense. I'm projecting some bounce back just across the board for this passing attack in 2024, and Geno Smith's at the center of it.
Maybe I'm reaching, but I'll throw out one more Seattle chestnut. They have cleared out the tight end room for Noah Fant. Iowa, if Vandy Barons were here, he would tell you how great the Iowa tight ends are. Noah Fant's been the one Iowa tight end who never really busted out. Could it be? And, some of these leagues, tight end premium, it's fishbowl scoring always uses that. The FFPC uses tight end premium scoring. Are you buying that maybe we'll see the best of Noah Fant this year?
I'm hoping we see the best of Noah Fant. I have my fingers crossed. And again, like, circumstances are much more conducive to a breakout. I think there's going to be a greater concentration of targets for these tight ends. Colby Parkinson out. Like, they made some moves that should be conducive to Fant being a more concentrated fixture in this passing attack. And because, the tight end position, you've got your volume hogs, kind of like, tight ends 1 through 7 are those more volume dependent tight ends. But, you look at, tight end 10 onward, and you're kind of hoping for like some touchdown upside. And those are maybe those players that are more volatile on a week-to-week basis. Like, I could picture Noah Fant being in this conversation, especially if this offense does trend up like we're projecting it to.
The words of Kate Magdziuk, who's our guest today on the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast. I am Scott Pianowski, sitting in for Matt Harmon. And if you like what you're hearing on this show, why not give us a rating and review? And you know what we'll do for you? We answer your fantasy questions. It's time for the fantasy mailbag. Stick with us. Coming right up. Welcome back, fantasy football champion. We know everybody listening to this pod would like to have a few I's dotted, T's crossed answers to your questions. We're going to do that today with a fantasy mailbag. We even have music for the occasion.
You've got mail.
When it comes, I want to well.
Goodbye.
The memories that brings back. Kate, I was online pretty early in the online world, 90s prodigy. And you could not call my house in 1996 and get anybody to answer because I was online having to figure out, how the Chicago White Sox scored a run in the first inning. So, modem life was a part of my life in the mid 90s. How about you?
It was, and it makes me kind of sad that like I hear that little modem noise, and I get kind of like these tinglies because I feel like I'm about to get this surge of dopamine because I'm about to hit the internet, and the whole wide world is about to be my oyster every time I hear that noise. And you know what? Kids these days, they just click and they're online.
With that, let's go to your questions. Okay. You can get in touch with us and send us your fantasy questions. And Corey did just that. He has the number one pick in his draft, Kate. He was set on Christian McCaffrey, but he's a little concerned about the calf injury. Are you going to give Corey the stamp to take Christian McCaffrey number one? Who's your number one player right now?
It is Christian McCaffrey. And again, I backed that up here when we were in our Superflex mock draft. You'll remember Christian McCaffrey was my number one pick in my draft. I had the pick at number 3. I took him over several elite quarterbacks. So I have utmost confidence. I go to my favorite injury analysts here anytime I have questions, concerns. So one of my favorite injury analysts here in the fantasy space, Dr. Edwin Porras of the Injury Prone podcast, he is pretty confident that Christian McCaffrey is going to be good. Now, he did have a calf injury at the end of last year. So this is almost kind of a recurrent issue, but generally speaking, per Dr. Edwin Porras, says 93% of players come back from these injuries without any problems. Christian McCaffrey was dealing with that injury at the end of 23, but it's not a concern. And he seems pretty confident. Usually it's like a 2-week timeline. And based on the fact that they announced this injury August 6th, should be good to go for the regular season, assuming they, rehab him as well as they want him to rehab. And let's be honest, I think they're going to take every single possible precaution with the centerpiece of their offense, who they just handsomely paid. Again, I'm all in on Christian McCaffrey. I have no reservations. Now, if we get closer to the regular season and there's still word that, they're not looking to have him practice, but here as it stands, as we're recording today, yeah, you light up Christian McCaffrey, full confidence. How about you, Scott?
Yeah, I'm still taking McCaffrey at number 1. And in fact, I think the more unsettled, although I would love Bijan Robinson and Breece Hall on some teams, my portfolio is gonna have some of those guys too. I'm more unsure what to do with that first receiver spot. If he goes first, I might take Hall or Bijan second because CeeDee Lamb, he's going to play opening day. I'm convinced of that. They'll figure it out. I always fade holdouts, but I don't know what kind of shape he's in. Jamar Chase is unhappy. He's holding in. Joe Burrow's had a little bit of trouble staying healthy in the last few years. Overall, the first round has more. I don't know. Everybody has upside in the first round. I love safe picks I can sleep at. And maybe I'm just kidding myself, right? Because it's football. Everybody's at risk to get hurt. Every running back is going to get tackled several times by the heaviest people on the defense. I get it. So maybe this idea that this guy's safer than that guy is just a fool's errand. Anybody can get hurt in week 1 and just ruin your season. It's the life we have chosen. Let me ask you, have you kept your receiver board static, or have you the top 3, 4, 5 names? Justin Jefferson now is dealing with Sam Darnold all season, which some people may be nervous. I do believe in Kevin O'Connell, but I get the skepticism there. The Lamb things can be kind of annoying. The Chase thing has been kind of annoying. Tyreek Hill's great, but he's in his 30s now. Amon-Ra St. Brown, as Matt Harmon has talked about, is really, really good, but he's more maybe of a B+, A-. Maybe he's not really in that first tier. Have you jostled those names at all as we've gone through the summer?
I haven't had a ton of movement in my rankings here. I still have CeeDee Lamb number 1, Tyreek Hill number 2. Although I will say, because of some of these other question marks, I have bumped Amon-Ra St. Brown up in my rankings. We know this is going to be a high-powered offense. I mentioned earlier when I was talking about Jared Goff, they have a pretty favorable indoor schedule, which has been really good for Jared Goff's overall production, and especially in the touchdown department, has provided a ton of upside there. So, like, if anything, it hasn't as much shaken up the order of my rankings, but it's made the tiers that I'm drafting with much, much closer. And you kind of just have to pick your poison. And sometimes, like, I think at that point, when you have all of these players with question marks, that's when you follow your tingly gut and you say, which one of these guys do I most want to root for in the regular season? Because, all of them have just a little point of hesitancy that could make you second guess them as your first wide receiver off the board.
Yeah, well said. And what I love so much about a Sun God pick in the middle of the first round, and sometimes you'll even get him a little bit later than that, is he's just 9 to 15 targets off the bus. And what that enables you to do is you get him, and then some of the other receivers you get in your receiver room can be more of like the Devonta Smiths, where it's going to be, some big weeks, and everybody has a 2 for 15 sometimes. But I feel like because St. Brown is such a drumbeat player, you can get a little bit boomer bust heavy with some, and again, the receiver position is a boomer bust position anyway. I get that. But I think with St. Brown's drumbeat, it enables you to take some of the more, I think back to the player Will Fuller used to be, where when he had a big game, it was 7 for 155 and 2. You're not drafting Will Fuller in 2024, but I just love that what St. Brown, and that's why the middle of the first round has become my preferred place to pick, because I can get something that kind of suits my drafting style. We all have a different drafting style, and you have to play to what yours is. Let's get to Connor, who says, hello, crew. I'm in a 12-team keeper league where I'm torn between keeping Jonathan Taylor in the 5th round. Last year, he obviously fell late in his draft with the contract dispute. Then later, he busted his thumb. Taylor looked really good in the second half, though. So Taylor in the 5th is one of his options. He can also take Zamir White in the 16th. Connor says, this one seems obvious on paper, taking JT, but I've been extensively mulling this over for a while because he's also high on Zamir White this year. He thinks maybe he offers more value in the 16th round, hoping you can help. So, Kate, you are co-managing with Connor, it sounds like. Jonathan Taylor 15th, Zamir White 16th. What say you?
I'm actually kind of surprising myself here a little bit. I'm still rolling with Jonathan Taylor in the 5th, who I think for where he's being drafted, because of that keeper value, because of how far he fell last year, still a tremendous upside. Now, here's where my decision-making, this is where I go with my decision-making. Jonathan Taylor in the 5th, yes, earlier round draft capital, of course, but do I think he has true top 5 upside? Absolutely. There's not a question in my mind. He was the RB1 just 2 years ago. Had an unhealthy season last year. The contract dispute, it was just kind of a messy season, but top 5 upside, no question about it. Zamir White, I ask myself, does he have top 5 upside? I don't think so. Now, I do like I think the Raiders offense probably generally a little bit underrated, but the quarterback is obviously a huge question mark between Aiden O'Connell, Gardner Minshew. There are question marks there. But looking back at the Raiders offense under Antonio Pierce, this team ranked 29th in total run and pass plays run under Antonio Pierce, 21st in yards per play, 24th in EPA per play. Zamir White was the RB8 in that 4-week span when he was filling in for Jacobs, but very much because of a volume role that he held. Do I necessarily think he has top 5 talent? Absolutely not. I'm just rolling with the elite talent. If you told me Jonathan Taylor in the second or third round, I'd be leaning White. But Taylor in the fifth, I'm feeling pretty good about that.
Yeah, I agree with you. Maybe Zamir White will provide more quote unquote profit based on what his raw price is, but he can never be a top 5 back. Where Jonathan Taylor, he was like a cover boy magazines a couple of years ago. And I know Richardson's there. He'll get some. It's a gift and a curse with the mobile quarterback because they also widen the field and they present rushing lanes. We know Steichen's a really good coach. And I'm curious to see if Richardson will keep all that goal line equity. This is a guy who only threw 350 passes or something at Florida. He's played 4 NFL games. It blows my mind that I see the upside for him. Again, a lot of people we respect are going to the moon with Richardson. I just think you get all of that with Jaden Daniels, and it's a lot cheaper, and he's played a lot more football. He just won a Heisman Trophy for crying out loud at LSU. Unfortunately, he won't have Malik Neighbors to throw to, but Terry McLaurin's pretty good. Taylor, this is a case of, again, you're not looking for, you don't win your league by how much over the market price did your player produce. You're trying to get difference makers, and Jonathan Taylor's a difference maker. He's a 5th round pick. In most leagues, he's going to be kind of around that 1st round, 2nd round turn. So get the impact player. We're in agreement. Jonathan Taylor is going to be our guy. Freddie is the final person who participating in the mailbag today. In a second, I'll give you details how you can get your question answered later this month. So Freddie's in a 12-team snake, half-point PPR, 2 keeper league, 2 wide receivers and a flex. He's in the 9 spot. Should he keep Amon-Ra St. Brown in the 2nd round, teammate David Montgomery in the 6th round, Raheem Mostert, what a monster season, but he's in his 30s. He can keep him in the 10th round. Tajay Spears is his other option in the 14th round. So it's Sun God 2nd, Montgomery 6th, Mostert in the 10th, Tajay Spears in the 14th. Who looks good to you?
I'm rolling Montgomery in the 6th, Mostert in the 10th, personally. Now, that comes from a couple of things. Obviously, I've talked endlessly about the Lions. Apparently, this is a Lions show. But David Montgomery playing alongside Jahmyr Gibbs, who, by the way, dealing with a hamstring injury, which also he has a history of hamstring injuries. So something to note, even if he is expected to be ready by the regular season. We know Montgomery is a key fixture in the red zone for this Lions offense that we're projecting to have a ton of trips to the red zone. Mostert in the 10th round, he finished as the overall RB2 just last season in half PPR scoring formats. Again, one of these offenses that has a very high rushing rate in terms of their overall play volume. And he's still really good. I know for everybody that has injury concerns about Mostert, we're happily ignoring the fact that Mostert has missed fewer games over the last 2 seasons, despite being the lead back in this offense, than Achane did just last year. Mostert has been the primary option here inside, these scoring situations. There was a reason that he had such a strong finish to the year. There was a reason he tied Christian McCaffrey for the most scrimmage touchdowns last year. I'm just going to roll with that upside because in the 10th round, I still think he has the potential to return easily RB2 value. And I still don't think there's there's a non-zero chance that he outscores Achane this year. I think there's a potential for him to still have more volume. I know he's older. I know he has an extensive injury history, but also, when I look at Mostert's age, he's not your average, was he 32? He's not your average 32-year-old running back because he really didn't get much run. He barely played on his rookie contract. He doesn't have as many live game reps as most running backs do in their age 32 season. So Mostert's age 32 year, it's a little different than most.
Yeah, I love that. Not to dehumanize the players, but he's like that used car with really low mileage,
Yes.
right? And isn't it so interesting how, and I realize Wright, the rookie in Miami, is interesting, but I look at Miami and Detroit, and Achane is a splash play waiting to happen, and Jahmyr Gibbs is very much that way. But when you draft those guys, and Gibbs has been going around the turn, maybe with the hamstring that pushes back a little bit, Achane's probably a 3rd round pick. But any given week, you do not know if they'll lead their team in touches from the backfield. You do not know when they score a close touchdown, if they're going to be on the field, if they're going to get that opportunity. Montgomery and Gibbs last year, I think they were one touch apart, so they basically had the same workload. Montgomery had a few more touchdowns than Gibbs. I don't know about you. Gibbs is great. And Achane, Miami, they're all about speed. Wright's a speed merchant. Mostert's a speed merchant. Achane is as fast as it gets, and so is Tyreek Hill. They're a track team. I get it. But there's something, I can't take a second or third round back when I know there's going to be weeks where I'm like, why did he touch it 9 times and the other guy touch it 17 times? Or why is he not on the field at the 2-yard line? I need a touchdown here. It's just not my DNA to draft these, knowing that they could beat me, that Achane could have a monster season, that Gibbs is more electric and more exciting than Montgomery. But those guys, Montgomery and Mostert, are going to score double-digit touchdowns. I think they're tremendous values where they're going.
I think that's absolutely spot on. And you mentioned the point about the excitement, the flash. We do get very enamored by that. And sometimes because, a guy like David Montgomery, not as flashy, probably not going to break off a 60-yard run at any given moment. Like, because that isn't in the realm of possibility, we kind of toss these guys aside, even though they are fundamental aspects of their real life offense. I think Zach Moss also kind of fits into this category of a guy that, is he as flashy as a Chase Brown? Absolutely not. Like, I personally love Zach Moss as a running back because I really like his running style. I really like the yards after the contact. I like the contact balance. He's my kind of like in between the tackles, wear you down type of runner that I love watching. So I think he's pretty exciting. But no, he does not have the speed to break off a 60-yard run at any given moment, barring a extreme lapse on the opposing defense. But do I think that Zach Moss is more likely by a decent mile to have double-digit touchdowns in comparison over Chase Brown? Absolutely. Like, he's one of these guys that, I don't think anybody's overly excited to draft, like a David Montgomery, like a Raheem Mostert. But I do think that these are going to be pillars of the offense that you can't ignore for fantasy.
We got to co-manage a team someday because, I published a polarizing players piece on Friday, and I almost put Zach Moss and Chase Brown in there. And I think Chase Brown has gone from, he's an interesting player, he's got an upside, he's in a position battle, to like people are acting like Chase Brown is all of a sudden the guy, and Zach Moss is just going to get kicked to the curb. I realized Zach Moss did not do much in the second half last year after Taylor came back. Maybe it's just hard to get in the groove when you're a clear backup, but he was pretty good in the first half of the year, and I think he's got more touchdown equity. People always point to that Chase Brown touchdown he scored on the pass last year, and he got up to a really high MPH. I think a lot of back score in that play. It was so well blocked. It was so poorly defended. I'm team Zach Moss. It's not that I'm thinking he's going to be John Riggins or anything, or Emmitt Smith, or but good offense. I see more goal line equity. I think he was better last year with the Colts, and he's given credit for it, even with kind of a poor second half. So we park our cars in the same Zach Moss garage. So the Fantasy Mailbag, this was our first trip to the Mailbag this year. It's going to be a staple all through August. You want your question answered, you can tweet to Matt Harmon if you want, or the Yahoo Fantasy handle. But also give us your voice memo, video, email to fantasymailbag@yahoosports.com. That's a good way to jump the line. We'll get to as many questions as we can during August. Keeper league questions, draft questions, trade questions, stat questions, league setup questions. We're here to help you. That's just about it for our show today. Kate, great job as I expected. I was really looking forward to this conversation. It did not disappoint. Tell our listeners how they can keep up with Kate Magdziuk.
Yeah, follow me on Twitter or X, whatever we're calling it these days, at Kate Magdziuk. That's Magdziuk. And of course, follow all of my work over at Yahoo. Today, I've got the all rookie team for 2024. You know who's going to headline that. It's Jaden Daniels. But in case you're trying to find out what other picks I'm excited about, check that out. We've got the fades from last week. We got a lot of awesome content, so be sure to follow along.
Yeah, for sure. One of my favorite follows, and one of my I'm just so glad that we're under the same umbrella at Yahoo. And you want to follow me on X, you're welcome to. It's Scott_Pianowski, doing a lot of exciting stuff this year. We just started a fantasy football newsletter. Andy Behrens and I will be the main writers on that, coming to you a couple times a week. during the summer. I'm not exactly sure what our cadence is going to be during the regular season. Maybe 2 or 3 editions. We'll get back to you on that. But please read, check that out, sign up for it if you can. We want to help you this season. That's going to do it for our show today. On Tuesday, Matt Harmon is back to kick off Convictions Week with Yahoo's Dan Titus. You know him from Yahoo Fantasy Basketball. He's also a great Yahoo Fantasy football player. So Matt, Dan, Tuesday, they're going to give you the bust of 2024. The people you don't want to draft. I'm not drafting Alvin Kamara, but what will they say? Come back for that. Till then, for Kate, for producer Colin, I am Scott, and we are out.